The Torah warns again and again,
do not worship other gods.
Deuteronomy 17 even says plainly, if there is found among you a man or a woman who worships other gods, you shall take that person out and they shall die. And this isn't just for Israel, for the Jews. Idolatry is one of the 7 Noahide Laws, so these warnings apply to all humanity. Pretty serious. But here's the problem. What does the Torah actually mean by worship? Most verses don't tell us. They just say things like, do not turn toward other gods. Do not follow other gods. Do not worship them. Okay, but what counts as worship? That's not obvious. Now, in a previous video, we did talk about what worship means, both personally and legally. In this one, though, I want to zoom in on the legal side. Which specific acts are reserved only for God? Specifically, in this video, we're going to find where everything is derived. But before we go further, let's review the ritual worship services that were reserved only for God in the Holy Temple. There were 4 main acts of service, and 3 of these acts could only be performed in the Holy Temple, nowhere else. The first is slaughtering animals. As Leviticus 17 verses 3 and 4 say, any man of the house of Israel who slaughters an ox, a lamb, or a goat, but does not bring it to the entrance of the tent of meeting to offer up as a sacrifice to the Lord before the Mishkan of the Lord, this act shall be counted for that man as blood. He has shed blood. The second is burning incense or burning offerings. Deuteronomy 12 verses 13 and 14, beware, lest you offer up your burnt offerings any place you see, but only in the place the Lord will choose. There you shall offer up your burnt offerings. In this verse, the place that the Lord will choose refers to the Holy Temple. Then the third act that is reserved only for God in the Holy Temple is pouring libations or drink offerings. We know that this one was reserved only for the Holy Temple because it is always tied to burnt offerings. Numbers 15 says, and the 4th part of a hin of wine for a drink offering shall you prepare with the burnt offering or the sacrifice. And as we went over earlier, since burnt offerings were only performed in the Holy Temple, then these drink offerings too were only performed in the Holy Temple. The 4th form of ritual worship in the Holy Temple is prostration, bowing. Unlike the other 3 though, one can bow anywhere. It doesn't have to just be in the Holy Temple. We know that they prostrated as a service in the Holy Temple, mainly because of the oral tradition, but it's also recorded in the oral Torah. When they heard the name of God from the high priest, they bowed and prostrated. We especially know, though, that you could bow anywhere. Abraham's servant bowed in prayer, Daniel bowed in exile, and Psalm 95:6 even calls for us to bow before our Maker. So to review, the Bible specifies 4 modes of ritual worship for God in the Holy Temple. 3 of these could only be performed in the Holy Temple, and these 3 are slaughtering animals, burning offerings and incense, and pouring libations. Bowing was also performed in the temple, but it could also be done outside the temple. But how do we come to the conclusion that if we perform any 4 of these worship services to an idol, we are liable of a capital sin? Now, I'm just going to warn you, it's not super obvious, and it actually requires a principle of biblical hermeneutics that was passed down from the oral tradition. So in other words, it gets interesting. So let's get into it. As we have already briefly noted, Deuteronomy 17 verses 2 and 5 states a general category that deserves death. If there will be found among you a man or a woman who will go and worship other gods, then you shall bring out that man or that woman who has committed this evil thing, and they shall die. In other words, worshiping other gods is a general category that makes one liable for death. But what specific act makes one liable for death? There are actually only 2 verses in the Torah that name a specific form of worship. The first is Exodus 22 verse 19. He who slaughters a sacrifice to the gods, except to the Lord alone, shall be destroyed. Here, slaughter is identified as an idolatrous action that, if performed to another god, deserves death. But here's the question. If Deuteronomy already told us that worshiping false gods is a capital offense, then why did Exodus go out of its way to single out slaughtering as a capital offense? The answer is that not everything counts as worship. If I drop a pencil before an idol, that might not necessarily be worship. So by singling out slaughtering, it's telling us something. Here's where the oral Torah gives us a key principle, which is one of the 13 principles of biblical hermeneutics that is passed down from the oral tradition. Remember, the Torah does not waste any words. So the principle goes, if a general category is given, in our case, worshiping other gods equals death, and then a specific case is pulled out from that general category, in our case this is slaughtering, it's not pulled out just for that case. It's teaching us about the whole of that case's specific category. So what is the specific category of worship that slaughtering is in? As we alluded to earlier, slaughtering belongs to the group of worship services that were reserved only for God in the Holy Temple. That means that the whole category applies. So not only slaughtering is liable for death, but also those that are reserved only for God in the Holy Temple, which are burnt offerings and drink offerings. So now we know that all three worship services, if performed to an idol, make one liable for death. But notice something. This category didn't include bowing, because bowing isn't solely reserved for God in the Holy Temple. So thus, Exodus 22:19 doesn't apply to bowing. Interestingly enough, though, the only other verse that specifies a mode of worship that is prohibited is Exodus 34:14, for you shall not prostrate yourself before another god. So now we know all four make one liable. But now you might be wondering, if Exodus 22:19 singled out slaughtering and we applied a hermeneutic principle, then why can't we do the same to Exodus 34:14, which singles out bowing? It's true, bowing does belong to the general category of worship. But unlike slaughtering, it's actually in a category of its own, because it is the only ritual act that was performed both in the Holy Temple and outside the Holy Temple. So that's why Exodus 34:14 prohibits it separately. To close, all of this applies not only just to Jews, but also to us non-Jews. Because one of our 7 laws is the prohibition of idolatry, and we only know what idolatry actually means by how God defines it for Israel, whatever act of idolatry is a capital offense for a Jew is also a capital offense for a non-Jew. Of course, we don't live in a society today that enforces these rules, but we should still follow them nonetheless, for God, of course. So what have we learned? By using one of the Oral Torah's principles of biblical hermeneutics, we saw that Deuteronomy 17 sets out a general category, worshiping other gods is a capital sin. Exodus 22:19 pulls out a specific case, slaughtering to other gods, also a capital sin. Since slaughtering belongs to the category of services that are only performed in the Holy Temple to God, the whole category applies, which would then include burnt offerings, burnt incense, and pouring libations, drink offerings. And then Exodus 34:14 adds bowing, which then makes all 4 acts of ritual worship, slaughtering, burning, libations, bowing, as prohibited if done to anything other than God. And there's one more case that makes one liable, and it's worshiping idols in the unique way that its followers worship it. It's a separate form of idol worship, and in another video we'll touch on that. Anyway, I hope you learned something. Thank you as always for watching.